Good evening. Good evening. Utility Safety and Environmental Committee is now called to order. The approval of the September 4th, 2024 Utility Committee meeting minutes. The approval, please. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
So moved by Mr. Stewart, second by Mr. Oswald.
Question.
Call for, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, have the same rights. Thank you. Minutes approved. First thing on the agenda is the matter of entering into a contract for the loading dock repair project at water pumping plant. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The main loading dock at water pumping plant is in pretty bad shape. We were hoping to wait to the plant expansion next year to get it repaired, but it can't wait. I talked with the city engineer's office. We have a couple other projects that were already passed by council. We're going to group them all together, hopefully get a better price. We like to do this as soon as possible. And we'd like it passed as an emergency, please.
Any questions? Oh, well, I'll read the committee. Thank you. The committee report. The loading dock repair project at the water pumping plant. The ordinance authorizing the mayor to advertise for bid and award a contract for said project. Emergency clause is requested.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
It was motion by Mr. Stewart, second by Mr. Armstrong.
Question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, has the same rights. Thank you. Next matter of business is the matter applying for the Ohio Department of Natural Resource Land and Water Conservation Fund grant. Director Ridden.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So this is an ODNR grant. We would like to update and completely redo the playground at West. So we have a few playgrounds at West. This would be the one that is east of the rec center, right by the ball field number 1, kind of as you come in the park off of Foster. It is in the master plan. The idea is to completely rip that one out, and I believe I looked the other day, it's 27 years old, so it's time. We would put in a fully accessible ADA playground, which means we would have the poured rubber. I don't know if anybody have seen it at some of the parks. You have I think Cascade has it at theirs, the poured rubber surface, so wheelchairs can go right on it. They don't have to worry about the mulch and all of those things. So the price tag on something like that is pretty high. The estimates I have right now, without it going out to bid or anything, are right around $650,000 for the whole project. That would include, any groundwork that needs to be done, drainage, things like that underneath, and then the poured surface, and then the playground equipment itself. So this is a 1-to-1 matching grant. This is the same grant that we did the other work at West Park, the trail, the restroom, and the pickleball courts. So we have a pretty good track record with this one. We do plan on also using CDBG money for this, so that would bring the city's portion down because we checked with ODNR and you can use that for matching funds. So without, not an exact number, but we would be looking at right around $325,000 would be the ask for this grant. And then the city between issue 6 and CDBG would match that for the total cost of the project. Sorry, the deadline for this is November 15th, so I did put on there if it could be passed as an emergency. I would take any questions.
I was just trying to look up on the park just to kind of see on my phone, just to see what we're talking about. But Again, this is just another case of the master plan that you're trying to make those improvements. You got 20-plus years of that use out of that equipment, so I would be in favor of that.
Anyone? I'd like to read the committee report. This ordinance is authorizing the mayor to apply for said grant to be used for a playground project at West Park. Emergency clause is requested due to grant deadline.
So moved?
So moved by Mr. Stewart. Second by Mr. Armstrong. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Has the same right. Thank you, Director Ritter. Yes. If there's nothing further to come before this committee, we'll ask that the utilities adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved in second that the utilities is adjourned. Moved by Mr. Oswald, second by Mr. Stewart.
Question?
Question's been called. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We'll call the Elyria Rules Committee meeting to order for Wednesday, October 9th, 2024. We have 3 items on the agenda. The first would be the approval of the September 18th, 2024 Rules Committee meeting minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved?
Second.
Properly moved and seconded.
Question?
Call for the question.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Second item is the matter of a new policy manual and related changes to Chapter 165, referred by HR Director Yusefi. Mr. Pinowski?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to just kind of introduce this and give a little bit of background. And then Susan Anderson is here, as well as HR Director Yusefi. But we started reviewing this policy manual, putting it together beginning of this year, probably around February. And it's something that the mayor knew that was being worked on, and it's something that he wanted to see get completed. So we've been working at it diligently. We've had multiple meetings amongst the core team, if you will. We've also met multiple times with department heads and the chiefs to get their input and feedback on the proposed policy manual that we had kind of put out there for review. We had extensive meetings with them and gathered input and feedback. We've made multiple revisions. At the same time with the policy manual, we've also been looking at the Chapter 165 rules and regs to update them, not just for time that has passed and changes that have been made, but to make sure they're accurate and reflect the current operations of the city, and make sure that, you know, where appropriate, they would be consistent with the personnel manual and vice versa, as that's sometimes challenging when you have cross-references and so forth. I've always believed that it's important to have a policy manual when you're an employer, especially an employer the size of the city of Elyria. It benefits both the employer and the employee, in my opinion, because it locks in, you know, it creates expectations or rules for both to comply with, and it should promote consistency and predictability of benefits and rights and processes in which both parties will be engaging in. So I've always found it to be very helpful to have a good policy manual, and in my experience, employees also appreciate it because they have a place to go where they can say, how does this work? What do I do next? That kind of stuff, and they can have a clearer path as to where they would go. And so I'm very much in favor of getting a policy manual in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions, or anybody else want to speak on this? If there's no questions, I'll read the committee report.
You got to get it on the floor.
But, all right, yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I would suggest just reading the committee report to get this on the floor, and then, Director Pianowski, are you looking to have either Attorney Anderson or Director Yusefi introduce anything, or just to be available for questions?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. We were planning on being available for questions. We had sent this document out to give that opportunity as well prior to this meeting. And so we responded to the ones we've received and tried to address any concerns raised. If there are still questions about content or form or purpose or process or anything of that sort, we tried to have anybody here that might be able to be involved in answering those questions, so we welcome them.
We have considered the matter of a new City of Elyria policy manual and changes to the codified ordinances, Chapter 165. And an ordinance accepting the said policy manual and the said changes to the codified ordinances, Chapter 165. Can I get a motion to get it on the floor?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? Mary or Mrs. Swerka?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple different questions. First off, are there job descriptions current for all jobs in the city right now? Because a lot of this is reliant on job descriptions.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just for clarification, Councilwoman Swerka, are you referring to the manual or Chapter 165?
The manual.
Updates.
The manual.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yes, through you, Chairman. We do have job descriptions for almost every job. I have everything, all the union positions we do have, any new 165 jobs we do have. A lot of them were still ones that we had created back in 2019 and have kept updated during the, when they did the big HR compensation study.
So, through the chair, so a lot of what's in here is dependent on the job description. For example, if someone is not able to work due to illness or calling in sick, it's based on their job description. So is your goal to get those up to date?
Every position that we have a person in right now, we have job descriptions for.
Current job description?
Current job descriptions
Okay.
for.
If I could continue, Mr. Chairman? Sure. Could you explain to me how the EEOC section is going to work if someone has a harassment complaint?
Oh, we have, one of the things that we'd like to do is move the, instead of having the EEOC committee, advisory committee, which was part of the original ordinances, 165, We are moving it to the responsibility of the DEI committee. We'll hear any type of complaint, and we'll still follow through with the harassment, that discrimination harassment type of process that's outlined here in the policy manual and in 165.
Through the chair. So in your experience as an HR director, Ms. Yusefi, you're going to let an employee who has a complaint go to another employee who's a volunteer on a committee in order to resolve their EEOC complaint?
No, it'll come to HR first. We'll go through that process. If there's a need for a committee meeting for that, then we'd move it forward to our DEI committee.
And so what's the expertise of these people on this committee? They're going to hear a particular sexual harassment complaint or some other workplace issue.
Well, aside from myself, I'm the chair of that committee. We have done a lot of training with the employees that are on that committee on just topics of discrimination, bias, different things like that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would note that issues of sexual harassment, discrimination and harassment will still be governed by Chapter 165.29 under...
I'm sorry,
and
what?
I'm sorry, will be under Elyria Codified Ordinance 165.29, and that's set forth. There are some proposed revisions to bring this up to date with federal and state law, and I would note that it is that the procedure is set forth at length as far as to whom those issues, allegations, et cetera, would go to. It would go to the HR director. There's a very specific time frame. If for some reason it would be inappropriate for the matter to go to the HR director, it would then go to, I believe, unless this has been changed, and I certainly will defer to Attorney Anderson on this, it will go to the law director and/or the administrative legal counsel to handle investigations of that matter.
Thank you. So through the chair. Okay, the equal employment on page 12 of the beginning of the policy manual is all the direct responsibility is going to the Human Resources Department. My suggestion would be, if it is in fact going to the ordinances or going to another section, shouldn't that be referenced in the policy manual?
Sure, we can
Okay,
add that
thank
for
you.
sure.
And if I could continue, Mr. Chairman? If I could continue, Mr. Chair. The only other question, I had sent in a lot of suggestions, and I think some of them were incorporated. The FMLA policy, I just wondered what the final revision of it was, and I guess my suggestion was, from the beginning, to have the policy say, we reference the federal FMLA policy, because if the federal policy changes, our policy then supersedes it, or is nullified, or if a collective bargaining agreement has a different FMLA policy. That was my concern on the original draft.
My understanding is that the law would always trump.
I'm sorry?
The law, if the Family Medical Leave Act is changed, then, changes for some reason, that would trump anything that we have.
Through the chair. That's why my suggestion in the beginning was to just say that we follow the federal law, period, and not have a separate, I guess, structure.
Mr. Pianowski?
Thank you, through you, Chair. First of all, if there's a collective bargaining agreement that has an FMLA policy, that would trump the personnel policy, and I don't know that all of them do. They might relate to something else, so just pointing that out there. The other part of it is we can certainly put something in there that says in the event that the federal law changes, that our policy will make those changes, shift with it, because sometimes those things happen in our process, maybe to update might lag a little bit. So you're right, there might be a gap there, but we should certainly monitor those things. So I don't have a problem with that. However, I do think it's helpful, if nothing else for the employee's sake, to have some of the guts of the policy, the real, maybe you don't have all of it. I've never sat down and counted the pages of the FMLA law, because, that sounds like a lot of fun. But, I have, most of the policy manuals I've written or reviewed do include enough guidance so that the employee can go to that one document, that one source, and maybe it's presented in a less legal way so they can also understand it a little bit better. So I do think that's helpful to have that there, and maybe we can look at ours and make sure that we're accomplishing those couple of things.
If I could, through the chair.
Mr. Callahan?
No, I just wanted to make sure you saw the Safety Service Director.
Mr. Swerko?
Thank you. That is exactly what was just done in Avon Lake, where their policy manual, the policy manual was rewritten referencing the federal law, but it had enough in it, but if the federal law changes, it's going to change. So that was my concern, because in the original draft that I read back in August, when you sent it, there were sections that said shall do X, Y, Z, and there were other sections that said may do X, Y, and Z. And that was my concern. Either it's consistent to say shall, or it's consistent to say may, in how they, I guess, call off, how their paperwork flows, et cetera. That was my original point.
Yeah, I think we updated some sections on that from your suggestions.
One other, through the chair, if I may. How are you going to disseminate this? Are you giving everyone a copy? Are you posting it on the website?
Mr. Fianowski?
If you mean, we're not quite done getting it out, so Susan could talk a little bit more about that as to how we're going to converse with the union leadership and so forth. It would be my suggestion, once we have everything approved and we have the final document, is that we put that on the intranet. I've always found that make it absolutely accessible. Some places have transitioned to that link approach, whereas, when I started looking at some of these things, people still had the binders on the shelves, and the binders are terribly challenging to update.
Yeah.
So I actually would suggest that we always go back to, we make it an official position that the link always controls. Whatever we have on the intranet is the most current version. So if somebody has a slightly older one on their shelf, we know where we always go there for the safe harbor of knowing where you're at.
Through the chair, are you then going to have employees sign off that they've acknowledged it and put it in their personnel file?
That would be the plan, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
We have a call for the question.
Everybody in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carried. Item number 3, which is related but different, the matter of a change to Chapter 165.07, Paragraph B1, usage of sick leave, referred by Prosecutor's Office. Darmstadt?
Darmstadt is here, Kathy Darmstadt. That's the original.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Currently, the section that we're questioning as sick time will be charged at a minimum of 1 hour, exact time for anything over 1 hour, and 8 hours for the workday. If someone, like take me, for example, my hours are 8 to 4:30. If I have an appointment at 7:30 and I could be at work at 8:30, I can't clock in till 9 o'clock, or I have to use personal time or vacation time. We're asking that the minimum be lowered to either 15-minute increments or a half hour so that we don't have to use an hour to start of sick time. The EPPA contract allows them to use a half hour to start, and the fire department, the IAFF contract allows them to use either 1 hour or 1/2 hour, depending on their schedule. So we're just asking to be allowed to use either a 15-minute increment or a half hour as our minimum.
Kalinowski?
Thank you. We actually discussed this with the managers and the department heads and the chiefs, because this was a term that I was somewhat unfamiliar with. I'd not had that in previous employers. And the issue they run in there too a lot, and they advocated to keep it at the hour. And the big challenge they have is people will be running late, and they're trying to set up their crews to go out for the day, and somebody will just try and use 15 minutes of sick time or something like that. So there is, it might not exist in your work environment, but in some of the other work environments that the city has, it does become somewhat relevant because they saw some abuse. I would be open to changing it to a half hour if that somehow is an acceptable compromise. It's still, and we could, for the other departments, I would just direct my department heads to, if you feel like it's sick leave abuse, then we can address that in a different way. But I think that, I think that an hour is a pretty lengthy period of time. And I do think to balance things out, for using your example, for instance, if you could be there a little bit earlier and get the work started, then I think that benefits us on the other side too. But I just wanted to let you know, we talked about it quite a bit, and it wasn't as arbitrary as it might seem. There was really some practical application for some of our departments where it meant something to them. So I wanted to make that everybody aware so that they knew there was some reason for it.
Ms. Swerka?
Thank you. Through the chair, the time system's still on tenths of an hour, though? The New World system is still on tenths of an hour. So that's every 6 minutes. So that's something to think about if you're trying to divvy up 15 minutes. It's kind of hard to be divisible by 6.
Right.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as an appointing authority myself, I would say that I do believe that for payroll's sake, for the interest of consistency, I do believe that there does need to be a minimum amount for vacation time, for personal holiday time. The minimum is a half hour initial. Then it does, anything beyond that is the tenths of an hour. I do think an hour can be excessive, but I would say that there does need to be a minimum. I don't believe that saying, okay, a tenth would be a sufficient minimum. I think that just I think it gets unwieldy, and I think for coverage purposes, et cetera, I think that from an appointing authority's perspective, I think that it's reasonable to say, look, there's going to be a minimum of half an hour, especially if you're looking at the beginning of a workday, that sort of thing. That, sick time that's not pre-approved.
Mr. Kalinowski?
Thank you. To Law Director Deary's point, sick time is not pre-approved, and I think that's valid because it does distinguish it from other paid time off kind of scenarios. But if everybody is open to it, I'd be willing to go back to the department heads and the chiefs and so forth, and some of the folks we got feedback from, recognizing the feedback we've gotten here as well, and see if we could reduce that to a half hour and see if that would be an acceptable median that would work across the different departments' needs. Because we recognize that, we have people working in different environments here, and there's different, we're certainly trying to factor in a lot of different impacts or what have you. So I'd be willing to look at that. I think that would probably be something we could work out.
And through you, Mr. Chair, obviously, if there's a collective bargaining agreement that is more specific on this or conflicts, then that would prevail. So this is for either if a collective bargaining agreement, and Attorney Anderson, correct me if I'm wrong, it is not specific in the collective bargaining agreement. I believe that all of them are specific, but I could be wrong. Or if again, we're dealing with non-collective bargaining employees.
To you, the chair, so are we looking to have action, or based on your comments tonight in regards to the other departments or through the union contracts, is that something that we're looking to put this in pending items until those conversations have been had, or?
Through the chair, if I could, given the fact that we're looking at the 165 revisions right now, I think the timing of this is great, and I suppose that you guys could put it in pending items, and we could look at that, because we're looking at the entire thing. One thing I would like to say is, that I didn't say previously, I definitely want to check with finance, their input to Law Director Deary's point about payroll and stuff. I definitely want to factor that in. And since we weren't looking at a change, I hadn't yet, but I will as I explore this. But if pending items, set it aside until we look at the entire 165, and we could, you guys will have an opportunity to approve that with finality, with full council, and we could certainly make you aware if we make this adjustment, and it would be one thing that we could bring to everybody's attention that I think would be important to the employees, but probably not terribly important in the grand scheme of things.
All right. I mean, I would recommend that only just because I know it seems some positive conversation that's taking place here tonight. But I guess when we have all the ducks in a row, we have everyone on a board with what maybe we're moving forward with, considering now and then moving, in the future, that everyone's on the same page and we're all kind of looking at it the same way. I didn't know if Attorney Anderson was going to comment on any of what's being brought before this particular one here. But I would make that recommendation, yes, to put it in pending items until it's a finality agreed upon.
So I would just say that to the extent that, well, let me start over. Each of your collective bargaining agreements does specify minimum increments for use of sick leave. So whatever change, if a change is made in the ordinances, your collective bargaining agreement will prevail unless we negotiate something different. So if you do change your ordinances and we want to negotiate with the union to change the collective bargaining agreement to accord, we can do that. But otherwise, it won't impact your collective bargaining agreements in terms of how that is implemented. But I would tend to agree with Director Pianowski in terms of the moving parts that are involved in making a change like this, in terms of talking to finance and the department heads and that sort of thing for operational reasons. And I would suggest that kind of fact-finding occur.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're not asking to go minute by minute. We're just asking that the minimum be lowered from an hour.
To be clear, I'm not offering minute by minute either.
We don't
so-
want, but we don't want anybody thinking that's what we're asking
No,
for.
I think
Yeah.
the request was clear, and I think, again, I think that 30 minutes, I think I can talk with my department heads, and we can probably make that work. Ultimately, if I say we're going to make it work, we're going to make it work. So, finance is the one that I'm really concerned about, making sure it doesn't hurt, make payroll too complicated. But I appreciate you bringing it forward, and we can have some conversation and see if we can adjust.
Thank you.
Mr. Soroka?
Through the chair, just to be clear, this is a very small audience, a very small group of employees that this would affect, because the rest are covered under collective bargaining agreements. So these are just the 165 employees, so I'm not sure what that number is. I'm guessing 50-ish, 60-ish employees. Through the chair, if I may, is there anything else that Attorney Anderson wanted to go through with 165 this evening? I guess I'm a little unclear as to whether we were going to discuss other changes on 165 or just the one on the sick leave change.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and the Rules Committee has already passed the committee report for the relevant updates to 165 that need to be made pursuant to, moving forward to implement a personnel manual, and also recommended updates based upon, I would say, present practices of payroll and finance, updates necessitated by changes in FMLA, updates in, I would say, definition of immediate family, things of that nature, and that has been dealt with. I think the primary reason behind having Attorney Anderson here was if there were any questions. For instance, how the collective bargaining agreements would be impacted, if at all, et cetera, just as a resource for all of you. Not that we aren't happy to have you.
And if I may, through you, Chair, just add one additional item that was asked earlier in regards to the policy manual. In terms of rolling it out to employees and to the unions, now that we're nearing the end of this, we will be notifying the unions of the city's intent to implement this policy manual. Each of your collective bargaining agreements addresses the city's authority to implement policy, and they each have their own specific procedure that the city is required to follow. So we will be following that, and I'll be working with Director Pianowski to follow those procedures and give the required notification to the unions, and that will be happening, after this meeting in the next week or so.
Any other questions? Everybody okay with putting this in the pending item?
Yes.
If there's no other business, we'll call for an adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned.